Most of the time, you don't want to interfere with project's ability to calculate the schedule, or you'll end up micromanaging your tasks. But sometimes, you have to restrict task dates. In Project 2010, you can use manually scheduled tasks or date constraints to do this, but each method has its pros and cons. Whether you use date constraints or manual scheduling to set task dates, you reduce the flexibility of your schedule, so use these features sparingly. In an earlier movie, you learned how to create manually scheduled tasks. Now, let's look at setting date constraints. Because you don't set date constraints very often, the Task Information dialog box is a great place to make this change. Select the task you want to work on. Schedule open house for employees, for example. On the Task tab, click Information. Then, click the Advanced tab. Every task in project actually comes with a date constraint, although most of the time the constraint is completely flexible, like the as soon as possible constraint. Other date constraints, like must start on, make tasks occur on specific dates, a lot like manually scheduled tasks. The one difference is that a date constraint controls either the start or the finish, while you can set both dates with a manually scheduled task. In Project 2010, the main reason to use a date constraint instead of manual scheduling is to create a partially flexible constraint. For example, you want a task to start after a specific date, but any time after that date is fine. As soon as possible means the start and finish date are scheduled as soon as possible based on the task length, the duration, resources, and work times. As late as possible is also flexible, but it doesn't leave any buffer for delays if something goes wrong. On the other hand, must start on and must finish on are completely inflexible. They set dates for a task with no wiggle room whatsoever. And then the other types are partially flexible. Start no earlier than means a task has to start after a certain date, but then it can start any time after that. For example, the open house for employees has to start after the office construction is complete, but can be any time after that. In the constraint type box, if you choose start no earlier than, then you also have to choose the constraint date. In this example, let's choose September 1st. Then click OK to set the task with the date constraint. You can also set date constraints in the Task Details form. Click the View tab, and then in the Details drop-down list, choose More Views. In the More Views dialog box, double-click Task Details form. In the Constraint box, you can choose the constraint that you want and choose the date. If you want to get rid of lots of date constraints, a table is the easiest place to do that. Right-click a column heading and choose Insert Column on the shortcut menu. In the drop-down list, choose Constraint Type. You can start typing the name of the field and then choose it when you see it in the list. Choose the constraint type you want to use, which is usually as soon as possible. You can drag a constraint type from cell to cell by dragging the rectangle from the lower right corner of the cell across other cells. When the crosshair turns to a plus, just drag down the other cells that you want. Sometimes date constraints seem to materialize out of thin air. Actually, you can create date constraints without realizing it if you aren't careful. If you drag a taskbar horizontally in the timescale, project sets a start no earlier than constraint. Date constraints let you restrict one date with different levels of flexibility. Manually scheduled tasks are great for pinning both dates to the calendar. So, pick whichever method is best for the task at hand.